The walls of Barrow Hill Correctional Facility in Texas were built thick, designed not only to keep inmates in, but to keep secrets buried. And no secret ran deeper than what happened between Warden Kyle Mercer, a man known for his discipline and political aspirations, and Talia Dorsey, a 27-year-old inmate with storm behind her smile. On paper, Warden Mercer was untouchable, a decorated former military officer, now running one of the toughest women's prisons in the state. Tall, sharp-suited, and relentlessly composed, he ran Barrow Hill like a machine. He was respected by his superiors, feared by his staff, and invisible to the inmates, just the way he liked it, until Talia arrived. She wasn't loud. She wasn't combative. But she had presence, the kind of presence that turned heads in the chow hall, and silenced whispers when she passed. Her eyes held a quiet challenge, and her file was sealed tighter than most. She came in on a weapons charge, but everyone could tell there was more to the story. The guards joked that she must have come from the streets, but her vocabulary, posture, and legal knowledge told a different tale. Talia Dorsey was educated, calculated, and from the first week, she caught the warden's eye. It started small. A casual glance during morning head count, a slightly longer pause on her name in the system. Then came the cell transfer. Talia was moved from general population to the administrative wing, normally reserved for solitary or high-level inmates. No warning, no write-up, just a reclassification written in pen. That wing? Just a few doors down from the warden's private office. At first, Talia didn't speak of it. She was careful, smart, but others noticed. Staff whispered. Inmates speculated. Talia was being escorted alone for her checkups. Her mail was suddenly delayed or intercepted. And then she started wearing makeup. Subtle, just eyeliner and gloss, but that was enough for the rumors to catch fire. One correctional officer, Officer Hughes, started to watch closely. He noticed the night rounds being shuffled. He noticed the way Mercer started requesting inmate profiles more often. And one night, he saw her walking back from the administration corridor with no escort. That was not procedure. Inside the prison, power didn't always come from a uniform. It came from access. And Talia had access now. Better food, medical treatment, books from the outside. Even her laundry smelled cleaner than anyone else's. But what she gained in comfort, she lost in safety. Because, while some envied her, others hated her. By her third month at Barrow Hill, Talia was called the warden's girl. And in a place where most women were surviving daily assaults from the system and each other, that title could get you killed. Behind the closed doors of Mercer's office, the relationship morphed into something more dangerous than either of them understood. He insisted on calling it consensual. He brought her coffee in paper cups, let her sit behind his desk when the cameras were off. He'd laugh and say things like, "You're smarter than half the staff here." But beneath the charm was control. He dictated when she could leave her cell, when she could eat, who she could talk to. He wasn't protecting her. He was possessing her. And still, Talia played along, because she had a plan, and because she had something she hadn't yet revealed. One evening, just after lockdown, Mercer unlocked her cell himself. She was sitting on her bed, calm as ever. "Got something for me, Warden?" she asked, her voice soft and unreadable. He smiled, "Just checking on my favorite inmate." She tilted her head. "You always say that, but you know I'm not really yours." His smile faltered. "You are while you're in my prison." She let the silence stretch. Then, "I need a new medical checkup. I've been feeling off." He raised an eyebrow. "You're fine. You don't know that. I'll schedule it." "No," she said. "You won't, but I'll get it done myself." Her eyes held his, steady, and something shifted in the room. For the first time, he realized he wasn't holding all the cards. What Mercer didn't know was that 2 weeks before her transfer, Talia had been diagnosed with HIV at a county intake facility. Her results had been flagged, but the paperwork hadn't caught up by the time she landed in Barrow Hill. And now she was waiting for the moment to use that truth like a blade. She hadn't told him. Not yet. She was watching him fall deeper into whatever fantasy he'd built around her. and waiting for the right moment to tear it down. Inmates started to notice the tension. Talia, once cool and confident, had grown more guarded. She spent more time writing letters she never mailed. She paced her cell at night. She turned down commissary items she used to hoard. Something was happening behind those eyes, like she was preparing for war. Then came the visit from a civilian medical contractor. It wasn't announced on the normal schedule, and no inmate saw them leave. But hours after the visit, Talia stopped eating. And Mercer? He started looking shaken. He skipped the weekly staff meeting. He barked at an officer for bringing the wrong files. And for the first time in his career, he called in sick. Meanwhile, Officer Hughes filed a report anonymously. He stated he had reason to believe an inappropriate relationship existed between an inmate and a superior. The report vanished within 48 hours. So he printed it again. And this time, he mailed it to the Department of Criminal Justice's Internal Affairs Office. No name, just the facts. Just enough to stir the waters. What he didn't know was that someone else was about to stir them harder. Talia had finally sent a letter. She addressed it to a nonprofit called Women Behind the Walls, an advocacy group known for investigating abuse in female correctional facilities. It was handwritten, 9 pages long, and detailed everything. The relationship, the threats, the power imbalance, the medical diagnosis, and her fear that she was being watched and would be silenced. The last paragraph read, "If this letter reaches you, I need you to understand. He thinks I'm just another inmate, but I know what I'm doing. And if something happens to me in here, it won't be an accident. That letter would change everything. But before it could, something else would happen first. Something no one would see coming. And someone wouldn't live to tell the truth. The heat in Barrow Hill Correctional Facility wasn't just from the Texas sun. It came from the walls, the secrets, the silent power plays behind every locked door. But no secret burned hotter or more dangerously than the one between Talia Dorsey and Warden Kyle Mercer. By now, their interactions were no longer rumors. They were patterns. Predictable. The same officers saw her escorted down the hall at the same odd hours. The same staff watched as she returned with quiet, practiced indifference. She wore like armor, cool, unreadable. But inside, Talia was counting every step, calculating every move. She wasn't just surviving Mercer's obsession. She was weaponizing it. At first, Mercer told himself he was in control, that he was offering her comfort, not abuse, that she came to him. He even went so far as to confide in a close friend on staff, a chaplain named Edgar Voss. "She's not like the others," Mercer once told him after hours. "She's smart, educated. It's not coercion. We understand each other." Voss didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. But he saw what Mercer didn't, his delusion, his unraveling. Because Warden Kyle Mercer didn't see Talia Dorsey as a threat. And that would be his biggest mistake. One night, Mercer brought Talia into his office under the guise of reviewing her behavioral file. The camera in the hallway had been conveniently under maintenance for the past 4 days. She sat across from him, composed, as he poured 2 glasses of contraband whiskey into paper cups. He offered her one. She took it, but she didn't drink. Instead, she stared at him. Quiet, cold. "You look tired, Warden," she said. He laughed nervously. "You trying to say I look bad?" "I'm saying you don't look like a man who's sleeping well." There was a beat of silence. Then he leaned in. "You don't talk to anyone else the way you talk to me. Maybe that's because no one else in here thinks they own me." Mercer's smile faded. It was the first time she pushed back, just enough to remind him she was still her own woman, still watching. And the next morning, she made her move. She faked an illness, severe nausea, chest pain, fatigue. She stumbled during lineup and collapsed during breakfast. They rushed her to the infirmary. The prison doctor, under pressure from above, was ready to brush it off as manipulation until he saw her vitals. Something wasn't right. Her blood pressure was spiking. Her immune markers were abnormally low. A full panel was ordered, blood drawn. The results came back 5 days later. HIV positive. The news shattered whatever remaining illusion Mercer had built for himself. Talia was called into the infirmary alone. The nurse who broke the news did so quietly, almost like a warning. "We'll begin treatment protocol immediately," she said. But this should have been caught at intake. Talia didn't flinch. She just nodded. "I already knew." The nurse blinked. "You what?" "I knew before I got here." The room went dead still. Talia leaned forward, whispering just above a breath. "But now you know, and soon so will he." When Mercer read the report, he didn't blink. He didn't speak. He simply closed the folder, stood up, and locked his office door. He was infected. He knew it. He just didn't know when or how. He'd been exposed. He'd been careful, mostly, but even the smallest misstep could have been fatal. He stared at the wall for a long time that night, sweat on his brow, hands trembling. For a man used to absolute control, the loss of power, of safety, was like drowning. And he knew Talia was the tide pulling him under. He confronted her the next evening, brought her to his office again. "No whiskey, no charm. You knew," he hissed. "I did. You put me at risk." She tilted her head, pretending to think. "Did I? Or did you put yourself there?" "I could bury you," he growled. "You already tried," she replied. Then she opened her hand and laid something on the desk, a folded sheet of paper. "I mailed this yesterday," she said, "to a group called Women Behind the Walls. Detailed everything. You, me, the test results, the manipulation, the threats. You got what? Maybe 2 days before they go public." Mercer's face drained of color. "You're bluffing." She smiled faintly. "Are you willing to find out?" That moment shifted everything. No longer was Talia the girl he thought he could control. She had flipped the chessboard, and now he was scrambling. Mercer returned to his quarters at night and scrubbed his laptop, called in favors from IT staff, made changes to visitation logs, shredded files in his private drawer. He even tried to access the prison mailroom to intercept outgoing letters, but the mail had already left. He called a contact at the Department of Corrections to stall any incoming investigations, told them a troubled inmate was spreading false claims and that she had tested positive for a contagious disease to manipulate staff. "Don't believe anything she says," he warned. But the letter had already arrived. At the advocacy office, the director, a woman named Layla Spence, read Talia's handwritten note 3 times before picking up the phone. There were dates, names, descriptions of specific bruises, an account of medical staff being silenced, and at the center of it all, a high-ranking official abusing power under the guise of protection. Layla knew this wasn't just a scandal. It was a case, a lawsuit, a story of systemic abuse so precise and so bold it would shake the state's correctional system. She began contacting reporters, lawyers, a medical investigator, and she promised herself Talia Dorsey would not be forgotten. Back inside Barrow Hill, Talia was moved again. New cell, new wing, new rules. Mercer said it was for her safety, but she knew better. It was isolation, punishment, desperation, and for the first time, Talia felt real fear, because she had played her final card. And the warden? Now he had nothing left to lose. Barrow Hill Correctional Facility operated like a sealed vault. Every door needed a key. Every camera was watched, except the ones mysteriously turned off. And when Warden Kyle Mercer realized his world was on the verge of collapsing, he didn't waste time pleading innocence. He moved like a man possessed. The cover-up began before the sun rose the next day. Talia Dorsey had become a liability. Too loud, too bold, too dangerous for a man like Mercer to allow her to breathe much longer. First, he targeted the medical wing. He summoned Dr. Shelley Bowman, the prison's lead physician, into his office with command, not a request. She was a woman in her early 60s, loyal to her job, but not to Mercer. Still, fear works faster than guilt. "I need you to alter her records," he told her. "No mention of HIV. Remove the blood work report. I want it gone from the system." Dr. Bowman blinked. "She has a right to her medical files." "You're confusing rights with convenience. This inmate is manipulating her diagnosis to destroy my career. Bowman hesitated. Mercer leaned in. If this gets out, you'll be answering questions about how a known infected inmate was allowed to interact with a warden. You want that attention? She said nothing more. By noon, the electronic records were scrubbed. The physical copies? Shredded. That was only the beginning. Next came the security footage. Mercer called in Hector Lyles, the head of the facility's IT and surveillance, a quiet man who kept his head down and followed orders. Mercer led him to the hallway outside the infirmary, the administration corridor, and the mailroom. He pointed to the exact dates. I need the video logs deleted for the last 30 days in these areas. All of it. Hector blinked. All of it? Sir, that violates. Are you refusing a direct order? No, sir. The footage vanished from the internal drive within the hour. But Mercer wasn't just deleting evidence. He was building a false trail. A new set of incident reports were manufactured. One claimed Talia had become verbally aggressive with staff. Another accused her of attempting to seduce a correctional officer unrelated to Mercer. A third painted her as emotionally unstable, citing supposed suicidal ideation and previous disciplinary issues, none of which were real. He even arranged for her psychiatric profile to be altered, signing off on a recommendation that she be placed in Level 4 mental health supervision, which included isolation, restricted movement, and no contact privileges. Talia was locked in a new cell, a narrow concrete box with no window, no clock, and no visitors. She was being erased, but she wasn't done fighting. Before her isolation, she had mailed 3 letters, one to the advocacy group, one to her cousin in Dallas, and one to a local journalist who'd previously written about women's rights in Texas prisons. 2 were intercepted, but one made it through. Layla Spence, the advocacy director who received her first letter, had already begun pushing. She had submitted a formal complaint to the Texas Board of Criminal Justice. She requested an emergency inspection of Barrow Hill. No response, so she went public. She gave an interview to a local news station under the title, Inmate Accuses Texas Warden of Abuse and Retaliation After HIV Diagnosis. It was the match Mercer feared. Suddenly, Mercer wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. Reporters began calling the prison. Lawyers requested records. Internal Affairs announced a surprise visit to Barrow Hill, and the Department of Corrections launched an inquiry. Mercer panicked. He ordered an emergency facility lockdown, claimed it was due to a security threat, but it was only a threat to him. During the lockdown, he initiated what he called a safety protocol on Talia, 24-hour surveillance, limited food, and complete male censorship. Officer Hughes, one of the few guards who'd suspected Mercer for months, took note. He watched Talia cell for days. No movement, no noise. One evening, he approached Mercer directly. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. We can't keep her like this. Mercer's reply was ice cold. She's not your problem. What Mercer didn't know was that Officer Hughes had started keeping his own records, photos of deleted logbooks, screenshots of surveillance gaps, and handwritten notes about his suspicions. And when the journalist finally reached out for an anonymous source, Hughes answered. He shared everything. And 2 days later, the reporter published it all under the headline, Texas Warden Accused of Covering Up Relationship with Inmate Who Tested Positive for HIV. The story spread like wildfire. Local TV, national blogs, Twitter. Suddenly, Mercer had more eyes on him than he could contain. In response, the Department of Corrections suspended Mercer pending investigation. But before he stepped down, he signed one final document, a Level 5 emergency mental health report on inmate Talia Dorsey. The report labeled her a danger to herself, and the next morning, she was found unresponsive in her cell. The prison staff claimed they discovered her hanging by a bedsheet, a supposed suicide. No security camera footage was available, again due to technical failure. The guards didn't call it in for 20 minutes. By the time the nurse arrived, she was gone, and with her, so was the last piece of the story Mercer needed to keep buried. But Talia's death didn't end the cover-up. It exposed it. Layla Spence demanded a full autopsy. The advocacy group filed a federal lawsuit. Officer Hughes leaked more documents, including Mercer's internal memos, the shredded surveillance schedule, and evidence that Talia's HIV diagnosis had been deliberately removed from her file. Even Dr. Bowman, the prison physician, came forward with a quiet confession. I was threatened. I knew the girl wasn't suicidal. She told me she was scared, and I didn't protect her. Talia Dorsey's body was sent to her family in a sealed casket. The official cause of death, suicide by asphyxiation. But the coroner's independent report told a different story. Bruising inconsistent with hanging, broken fingernails, defensive wounds, and one heartbreaking detail. She was 3 months pregnant. The cover-up had worked for a while, but not forever, because even buried truths rise when enough people are watching. And this time, the world was watching. But even before those words were spoken, Talia Dorsey was already gone. The guards moved slowly, not because they didn't understand the urgency, but because some of them already knew what they were walking into. And a few, they may have helped make it happen. Talia had been in solitary confinement for 7 days straight. No visitors, no phone calls, and no outside contact. Her meals were delivered through a slot in the door. Her bathroom breaks were monitored. And according to records, she hadn't been seen speaking a single word since being placed there. But Officer Hughes knew better. He'd seen her, briefly, 2 nights prior during a hallway check. Her eyes had met his through the cell window. Bloodshot, hollow, but awake. Now she was lying on the floor, limp, cold, barefoot. The official story broke before the sun rose. Inmate found dead in apparent suicide at Barrow Hill Correctional Facility. They said she had used a bedsheet. They said she left no note. They said she'd shown signs of emotional distress due to disciplinary infractions. But nothing about that made sense. Talia had been writing letters just days before. She had reached out for help. She'd made plans for legal action. She was 3 months pregnant. And above all, she had been fighting. Hard. A woman who'd weaponized her voice didn't silence it that easily. When Cassandra Dorsey got the call, she dropped the phone. Her knees buckled. Her body collapsed into the kitchen chair she bought years ago for Talia's baby shower, the one that never happened. "She's dead?" she asked, as if the words could somehow undo themselves. A prison official gave the usual condolences, speaking like a man who had repeated the same script too many times. "We'll provide full transparency as we investigate," he said. But Cassandra already knew what that meant. No answers, no justice, just a sealed box and a funeral bill. The advocacy group Women Behind the Walls released a statement within hours. This was not a suicide. This was retaliation. Talia Dorsey reached out to us with evidence of abuse and misconduct. She feared for her life. She begged to be protected. Instead, she was silenced. We demand a full federal investigation. Media picked up the story, but Mercer remained quiet. He had already stepped away from the prison, claiming a leave of absence due to medical complications. Some speculated it was the HIV diagnosis. Others whispered it was fear. Because if Talia's death unraveled, so would his entire legacy. The autopsy report, conducted by the prison's in-house medical team, was rushed. Cause of death, asphyxiation due to self-inflicted hanging. Toxicology, negative. Signs of struggle, none. Pregnancy, undisclosed. But Talia's mother wasn't satisfied. She demanded a second autopsy, this time from an independent pathologist. It took weeks. Weeks filled with grief, rage, protests, and nationwide calls for prison reform. And then the second autopsy report arrived. There were bruises around Talia's wrists, defensive in nature. There was swelling on the side of her face, likely from blunt force trauma. There were deep abrasions on her knuckles, evidence she had fought back. And most disturbingly, there was no evidence of hanging, no neck fractures, no petechial hemorrhaging, no ligature marks that matched the bedsheets found in the cell. But there was one detail the state report left out entirely. She was pregnant. The press exploded. Inmate was pregnant before death. Suicide claim in doubt. Warden's secret child? Inmate's autopsy sparks new accusations. Cover-up or cold-blooded murder? The mystery of Talia Dorsey deepens. Suddenly, it wasn't just about inmate abuse anymore. It was about a possible prison homicide, a pregnancy, and a government trying to erase both. Talia's name became a rallying cry. Her photo, once ignored, now stood on signs and posters across Texas. Marches formed outside Barrow Hill. Former inmates came forward with eerily similar stories of coercion, manipulation, threats. But none had gone as far as Talia. None had made it personal for the man in charge. Mercer was officially placed under investigation. But he wasn't arrested. He wasn't charged. He wasn't even interviewed for weeks. Instead, the system protected itself, slowly, silently, like it always had. But something was different this time, because Talia had left breadcrumbs. Inside the envelope she'd mailed to the advocacy group, there was one more letter, one no one had seen until now. It was addressed to her unborn child. They will never let me walk out of here. I can feel it. But if this reaches anyone, just know I didn't go quietly. I loved you before I ever knew you. And I hope one day someone speaks for me the way I would have spoken for you. Those words spread like wildfire, shared on social media, printed in newspapers, quoted at rallies. She was no longer just an inmate. She was a martyr, a symbol, a spark. By the time the DOJ stepped in, the damage was done. Mercer resigned, quietly with full pension. Several prison staff were terminated. A state review board recommended comprehensive oversight reforms. But no criminal charges were filed. Talia Dorsey was buried on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Her casket was small, plain white. Inside it lay two lives, hers and the one that never got to be born. Cassandra stood by the grave for hours. I told her not to trust people like him, she whispered. I told her, but she believed in second chances, and they took that from her. The injustice burned, but so did the movement that followed, because what Barrow Hill tried to bury was no longer underground. It was on every screen, every protest sign, every voice demanding change. And Talia Dorsey, silence in life, had become deafening in death. The state of Texas had seen scandals before, but nothing like this. Nothing as ugly, as intimate, or as damning as the story of Talia Dorsey, an inmate who exposed her abuser, became pregnant with his child, and died behind bars under circumstances so suspicious even the word cover-up felt insufficient. Now her name echoed across courtrooms, legislative chambers, and national media broadcasts. But for Cassandra Dorsey, Talia's mother, no headline could dull the pain. No quote could fill the hole left behind. No apology could give her back her daughter, or the unborn grandchild she never got to meet. Instead, she turned that pain into action. She began attending press conferences, sitting down with lawyers, speaking to advocacy groups. And every time she opened her mouth, she started the same way. My daughter was not a victim. She was a whistleblower, a mother, a fighter, and they killed her for it. The first major legal move came from Spence and Hall, the civil rights firm that partnered with the advocacy group Women Behind the Walls. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, naming Warden Kyle Mercer directly in the complaint. The lawsuit claimed sexual misconduct and abuse of authority, tampering with medical records and surveillance footage, gross negligence leading to Talia's death, conspiracy to obstruct justice, emotional and psychological trauma inflicted on a pregnant inmate. But Mercer's defense painted a different picture. His legal team leaned on the same tired narrative, that the relationship was consensual, that Talia was emotionally unstable, and that her death was a tragedy, but not a crime. What they couldn't explain was how her bruises told a different story, or why her pregnancy was never disclosed in the prison's autopsy, or why surveillance footage had vanished the week she died. The public wasn't buying it. Media outlets dissected every page of court filings. News anchors revisited the timeline of events in primetime specials. Podcasts covering systemic abuse in women's prisons surged in downloads. And outside the Barrow Hill facility, protesters gathered weekly. Former inmates began coming forward anonymously, describing eerily similar experiences with coercion, threats, and cover-ups. One woman revealed she had also tested HIV positive after an inappropriate relationship with an officer, but was too afraid to report it. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't just about one inmate and one warden. It was about an entire system built on silence. Under mounting pressure, state lawmakers launched a formal inquiry. The findings were damning. Barrow Hill had logged at least 7 reports of sexual misconduct by staff in the last 5 years, all of which were dismissed as unsubstantiated. There were multiple security failures, including deactivated hallway cameras and altered disciplinary logs. At least 3 other inmates had been placed in isolation without documented cause during Warden Mercer's tenure. The final report concluded, there exists a pattern of abuse, manipulation, and administrative negligence at Barrow Hill Correctional Facility that warrants immediate external oversight. But still, no criminal charges. The public demanded to know why. Why wasn't Mercer behind bars? Why was a pregnant woman found dead in a cell and no one held accountable? The pressure reached Governor Avery's office. He issued a statement. We mourn the loss of Ms. Dorsey and acknowledge the serious questions surrounding her death. I've instructed the state attorney general to conduct an independent review. It sounded like action, but it felt like stalling, because months passed and Mercer was still free, living quietly in a suburban neighborhood outside Austin, seen walking his dog, going to the gym, smiling, as if none of it had ever happened. Then came the leak. A whistleblower from the Office of the Inspector General released confidential emails between Mercer and senior prison administrators. In them, Mercer admitted the relationship with Talia Dorsey. He expressed concern about her pregnancy. And in one chilling message dated just 3 days before her death, he wrote, "She's about to blow everything up. If this gets out, I'm finished. We may need to move her permanently before the audit." The phrase "move her permanently" became a lightning rod for fury. Legal analysts called it incriminating. Human rights groups called it the closest thing to a confession. And finally, the state attorney general issued a warrant, not for murder, but for obstruction of justice, tampering with official documents, and misconduct in public office. It wasn't the justice Talia deserved, but it was the beginning. Mercer was arrested in the middle of the night, his hands cupped behind his back as camera crews filmed the moment. At his arraignment, he pled not guilty. The courtroom was filled with reporters. In the front row sat Cassandra Dorsey, clutching a photograph of Talia, smiling, radiant, full of life. When the judge denied bail, a small ripple of hope passed through the crowd. For the first time, someone in power was being held accountable. But even as the case moved forward, Cassandra refused to slow down. She launched the Talia Dorsey Foundation, a nonprofit committed to advocating for female inmates' rights, mental health support in prisons, and whistleblower protection laws. Her work began catching attention from national civil rights leaders, senators, and criminal justice reform coalitions. And slowly, state by state, the dominoes started falling. Laws were passed requiring mandatory external investigations into any inmate death involving prior abuse allegations. Inmate pregnancy care was restructured to include third-party health audits. Prison surveillance data was required to be backed up off-site, removing internal manipulation. Talia's name appeared in bills, in legislation, in news tickers across the country. She had become more than a headline. She had become a reckoning. Back in court, Mercer's trial became the centerpiece of a national conversation, not just about abuse, but about how easy it had become for people in power to hide behind a badge, a title, or a wall. On the final day of testimony, Cassandra took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just said, "My daughter begged for help. She told you she was scared. She told you someone would hurt her. And all you did was watch. So now, I want you to watch me, because I'm not stopping. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not letting her story die." The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 14 years, not for murder, but for the crimes the state couldn't look away from anymore. And as he was let out of the courtroom, cuffed and expressionless, Cassandra whispered to her daughter's photo, "We did it." Talia Dorsey didn't die for nothing. Her voice, once silenced, had echoed louder than any prison door could contain. And her story? Still changing the world, one courtroom, one law, one truth at a time. If Talia's story moved you, don't scroll past. Backhand index pointing right like this video so her truth reaches more people. Backhand index pointing right comment below to say her name. Backhand index pointing right subscribe to our channel, where every week we expose the buried stories of those forgotten by the system. Candled justice isn't just a verdict, it's a voice. Let's make sure it's heard.